I was just watching a video where Graham Bessinger was interviewing Michael Eisner. And you can watch us break down that video in more detail on the Orange Grove 55 channel. Orange Grove 55 always talks about Disney, and that video should be posted later this week. And it's just us reacting to Michael Eisner and how honest and authentic Michael Eisner is. One of the things that Michael Eisner talked about that I think is worthy of touching base on, especially as it relates to startups, is this idea that there could be co-CEOs. So at the time of the recording of this interview with Michael Eisner, Disney had not made a decision on who the CEO is going to be. Now we know that it's going to be Josh D'Amaro, and that Dana Walden is stepping up into a higher role at Disney, but they're not co-CEOs. The only company that I'm aware of that's a really, really large company right now that has co-CEOs is Netflix, and that seems to be working really well for them. It does seem to me like Ted Sarandos is the functioning CEO, and Reed Hastings is sort of like the founder that has the title, but I'm not sure what their dynamic is in working with each other. But it made me think about the idea of co-CEOs, because we talk on the Orange Grove 55 channel, we talk about Disney leadership a lot. And because of that, this question came up of like, a lot of times Disney has done this excellent job of having a Walt and a Roy, and they are a one and a two who are really closely tied together and managing the company really well. Another example of that is Eisner and Wells. When the two of them worked together, it worked really, really well. And so the question is this, Iger didn't have that, that I know of, that we can tell. Iger was the main guy. So the question is, should there be co-CEOs of something? And Michael Eisner said, no, I don't think that's a good model. When I was involved in co-founding the tech startup that I was involved in, we had a CEO and a president. And the question was, is that a good idea? Now, we took a lot of advice from Y Combinator as we were pursuing our startup. One of my co-founders had actually had a company that had graduated from Y Combinator, and so we respected them. And Y Combinator's advice is the same as Michael Eisner's. You should not have two CEOs. And we, as a startup, had a president and a CEO, and they were both had the same sort of weight. And here's my story about why I think having two CEOs or co-CEOs, or a CEO and a president who basically have different titles but a similar role, why I think it's a really bad idea. So the two friends that I had that I was a founder of the company with, we were a real estate tech startup, and one of them was a real estate agent, a very highly successful real estate agent, and the other one was a highly successful tech startup founder. And the two of them started the company, and they didn't define roles between each other. They said one of us is CEO, one of us is president. And when we interviewed for Y Combinator, we almost got in, but we didn't get in. We had two interviews. They gave us two interviews, and based on a couple of answers to the questions that I think we could have answered way better, we did not get into Y Combinator. And that set us on a trajectory where we had to really figure out what we were doing and make sure that we were on the right track. But what it also did was it unveiled a problem with our leadership structure, because suddenly there was a question as to how the business should be run. One of our president CEO combo thought that we should have a cash in, cash out business where it could be turned into a passive income kind of a situation. The other thought that we should continue to grow the business into a corporation so that it could be sold to someone else in the marketplace. Kind of more of a traditional tech startup kind of pattern. And the problem is that we had two other employees, myself and one other guy who was a developer. And all of a sudden, these two could not see eye to eye on what decisions should be made. Neither one of them had ever come to terms with who's the final decision maker. So to a certain extent, what happened in that scenario was it was up to myself and the other employee to sort of vote on which leader's plan we were going to follow. That is not something you ever want to happen in a tech startup. Now, I don't mean that a tech startup shouldn't be collaborative and everybody should weigh in on the decisions that are being made. I think that that's true. But you want someone at the end of the day to say, this is the direction we're going, and if you don't agree with it, then maybe you need to leave the company. But we had to fight about it because there was no role that was like, this person gets to make the decision and this person doesn't. They were equal. It was equal. And so what that made me realize is that you really do need to have an identified individual on the team who puts this final stamp of approval on whatever decision's being made. And we didn't have that. And that was the final unraveling of that company. I can tell the story in more detail later on, but because of that fight, then there was a question of, well, we went to get other investment. We actually had other investors lined up, and we had other people we could pitch to that really liked what we were doing. We had several advisors that were really cool to us and doing really cool stuff with us, but they basically said, you have this breakup of the company. We all chose to go after the more of the traditional tech startup kind of growth pattern, and the trajectory of the company means that this other guy who saw it as a cash in, cash out business, passive income business, I'll say, he was just on our cap table, but it was dead weight because it wasn't doing anything anymore because we kind of voted him off the island, so to speak, a little bit. That's just how it played out. And that ultimately killed the company. So I can go into that story if you guys want more detail on that story. I can go into that story with more detail in another video. But my point is that if you have not adequately determined who the decision maker is, it can actually unravel your company just like it did for us. So I do believe that there can be co-leadership of something where there's a 1 and a 2 that work really closely together. That's the Walt and the Roy, right? It's not equal. It's just slightly, Walt puts the rubber stamp on it. Roy just gives him a lot of advice and sits next to him. Eisner and Wells, same difference, right? Eisner talks about that in the interview. So I think co-CEOs is not a good idea. I do think duality of leadership is a good idea, but it's very important that you get those two positions exactly right if you're going to do it, at least the way I see it. How do you see it? Leave me your comments down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video. Bye.